mouth-to-mouth rescue breathing. So let's start with first aid. We'll start with the aims and objectives of first aid. There are three things that we want to achieve in taking this course. Number one is to save and preserve life. As a first aider, our first priority is to save the life of the casualty or preserve the life of the casualty. The next thing is to prevent the condition from worsening, right? Yes. If the person's life is saved, the next thing is to what? What other conditions is the victim suffering from that can get worse if not attended to? So number one, save life. So if we get an accident scene, we see a victim that is probably bleeding, right? And somebody, the victim also has broken bones. We first attend to the issue of the what? Bleeding, because that is life threatening, before we then attend to the issue of what? Broken bones. So prevent the condition from worsening, that is to prevent further injuries or complications. And the number three thing is to promote recovery, promote the recovery of that victim. So now let's look at a very technical definition of first aid. I prefer this definition because it is more technical, relating to what first aid truly is. So first aid is defined here as the skilled application of accepted principles of treatment on the occurrence of any injury or sudden illness using facilities and materials available to you at any time. Now, if you look at this definition, one of the things underlined here is what? The first thing underlined here is what? Skilled application. Meaning that as a first aider, you need to be trained. Nobody, no Tom, Dick, or Harry can just get on the road, see a victim, and apply anything that he calls first aid. You must be trained as a first aider. That's part of what we're doing here. So we said it's the skilled application of accepted principles of treatment. Now, first aid is a subset of medical science, is a branch of medical science. You can't call anything first aid. Whatever is not accepted in medical science as first aid cannot be regarded as first aid. So I'm sure that for many of us, we've heard that if somebody has maybe an injury, you can apply rope, you can apply oil, you can apply palm oil. All those things, they sound good, or they may even work, but they are not applicable when it comes to medical science. So only things that are acceptable in medical science can be rendered as what? As first aid. And if you also look at this definition, it also says that on the occurrence of any injury or sudden illness, using facilities, materials that are available to you at any point in time. So it is the approved method of treating a casualty until placed, if necessary, in the care of a doctor or removed to a hospital. Now we go to the next topic in this, the next subtopic in this topic, and that is what? The scope of first aid. So first aid is about three things. Number one, diagnosis. Identify and state in simple terms the problem that the victim is what? Suffering. So on getting to an accident scene or getting to a scene with somebody with a casualty, the first thing you want to identify is what is this person suffering from? What caused this victim to be in this position? Or what is the victim experiencing in this position? Is the victim having breathing issues? Is the victim having broken bones? Right? Is the victim unconscious? What caused him to be unconscious? Diagnosing the problem. What caused the victim to be in that situation? What is the victim suffering from? Number two thing that we are doing in first aid is that what? We treat. Now, if you look at the aims and objectives of first aid that we treated before, we said number one, to save life, number two, to prevent condition from worsening, and number three, to promote recovery. So everything that we do to achieve these aims and objectives, we call them what? Treatment. Every single thing that we do to achieve these aims and objectives, we call them what? Treatment. So treatment here implies all measures taken to preserve the life of the victim, to prevent the condition from getting worse, and to relieve pain. It does not involve the use of drugs. Yes, we must also state this, is that in first aid, we did not administer drugs. And that's why in your first aid box, there should not be paracetamol, even paracetamol there. And the reason why we do not administer drugs is that we are not doctors, neither are we pharmacists, right? We don't know the accident history of what the person is suffering from, right? The person not in the hospital, not perform any test. So administering a drug may be wrong at this point in time because you don't really know, you've not performed any test, you don't know the reaction of the drug, of the victim to the drug that you're going to be prescribing. And you are not even a doctor, you're not even a pharmacist. So we do not administer drugs in first aid. And finally, evacuation, that's the third thing in the scope of first aid. So the first aider should institute evacuation procedure as laid down by his organization if communication contact is impossible. So this is if you're working for an organization and you're trained as a first aider in your organization. Whatever principles have been laid down for you to administer as a first aider, you stick with that, right? So, but in the regular situation, you make calls before you even start rendering help, right? You make a call to medical line. You can dial 112. That's the medical line in Nigeria. I believe NCC has sent text messages all around, especially in this COVID-19 period. That's the line in which you can use to get medical help, get police available, get security force available. So 112 is the number. You dial 112, report what is going on, so that medical help can be what on its way to the place of the incident or the accident. Now let's look at the next subtopic here. We say the first qualities of a first aider. What are the qualities that a first aider should have for that first aider to be an effective and an efficient first aider, a good first aider? So say number one, the first aider should be observant. The first aider has to be very, very observant. Why? Because many times or sometimes the victim is not always conscious. So the first aider has to know what is this person actually suffering from without have the victim speaking, right? By noticing what is on ground. And that thing is that as a first aider, you must look out for danger. You must be careful when rendering first aid, such that the whatever caused the victim to be in that position does not come and affect you. For example, if you have a victim that was struck by a snake, that was bitten by a snake, and the snake is still around, you don't just jump around on the victim and start arranging help. The snake can still be on the victim, right? So as a first aider, you should be very, very observant. Number two is that we should be very careful as a first aider. Why? Because we're dealing with a life, right? In medical science, people go to medical school for 5 years. People go to university for 5 years.
Hello everyone, please be patient. Your lecturer is having some technical difficulties, but we're fixing it. We'll be back in 3 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about the break in the network. I'm back. So we're talking about the qualities of a first aider. So we mentioned observant. Yes, a first aider must be observant. One minute here for my material to upload. All right. So we saw that a investigator must be observant, right? A investigator must be careful because a investigator is dealing with lives, right? Because a investigator is dealing with lives. And a investigator must be confident. And the reason why we say confident here is that many times when you are you want to administer first aid in the scene of an accident, there are usually other people there, right? And other people will be like, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that, do this, do that. So as a first aider, you must be able to take control of the situation. You must be able to take charge of the situation. That's what we mean by you must be confident. Because there will be a lot of naysayers. There will be a lot of people that claim to know, right? So you must be confident. As a first aider, also, you have to be persevering. When we talk about CPR, when we treat CPR, you understand what we mean by persevering. You have to continue to render help until medical help arrives, right? You cannot say time of death, I'm giving up. No, you're not a doctor. You have to continue rendering help until medical help arrives. As a person, also, you have to be tactful, especially when you are in a situation, in an environment that you cannot carry out all your functions as you want. For example, let's say you're in another part of Nigeria and you are the only person that you want to render help to a member of the opposite sex, right? You must be tactful in the sense that if I'm the one there, I'll ask somebody of that same sex to render the help, guiding the person on what to do, right? So as a person, you must be tactful. You must be sympathetic as a first aider, resourceful as a first aider. You will not always have everything available to you. You must use what you have that is available at that particular point in time. As a first aider must be explicit, a first aider must exercise good judgment. And most importantly, a first aider must be empathetic, because it takes a level of empathy to stop what, assuming you are going to work or you are going for an interview, right? And there was an accident, and you have to miss the interview to attend to the accident victim. It takes a level of empathy to do that, right? So as a first aider, a good first aider has to be empathetic. Yes, a good first aider must have empathy. So now, general rules guiding first aiders. General rules guiding first aiders. So as a first aider, these things, when you are about to render help or render first aid, you must remember these things. Number one is that you are to reassure the victim at all times. When the victim is conscious and you are rendering help to the victim, one thing that you must do is that what you must reassure the victim throughout the process, right? You get to an accident scene, there was an accident, there's blood everywhere. You cannot break down. You cannot be like, oh my God, this is terrible. Something like this has happened before and the person did not survive. You can't be like that. You must reassure the victim, irrespective of what has happened, irrespective of how serious it is. You are going to be okay. Everything's going to be all right. You must reassure the victim if victim is conscious as you are rendering first aid. Then number two, we said do not move the victim unless absolutely necessary. In first aid is that when you are rendering first aid, you don't move the victim around. Now, if there's an accident victim, that victim may have internal injuries, and moving the victim will only make matters worse. Rather than promoting recovery, such first aider is going to be worsening the situation. So do not move the victim unless absolutely necessary. Number three, we say do not allow people to crowd around you. As a first aider, when you are rendering first aid, whenever there's an accident, people gather around, right? You must take charge and have them move backwards so that the victim have fresh air, right? So you must not allow the people to crowd around you. Next, don't leave the victim unattended to until a doctor takes charge. Even if you render help and the victim becomes conscious and the victim is now okay, you have to wait with the victim until help arrives or until the victim is taken to the hospital, right? Then one of the reasons why you need to do this is that when help arrives, they may have to ask you some questions. There are some questions that only you may be able to answer as the first aider there. So you cannot leave a victim unattended to until help arrives. Then when there's an accident scene, if the person is unconscious, one of the things that you do is that generally you're losing any tight or restrictive clothing around the neck, the waist, to allow easy breathing and blood circulation. If the victim, for example, is wearing a tie, right? A tie, you can loosen the tie, you can loosen the buttons, the first two buttons of the victim shirt, right? You can loosen the wristwatch to allow circulation, you can loosen the belt, right, to allow circulation, just to acclimatize the victim and make the victim comfortable so that blood will circulate properly, breathing will be easy. Yes. Then we said do not panic, stay calm and take charge. I've mentioned this before. You can't be panicking when there's an accident and you're a first aider. If the victim is conscious, you're going to make the victim scared, right? And usually when we panic, we are not able to function to our best capacity, physically and mentally. So remain calm. And that's why when you look at it, notice when you go to hospitals, right? No matter what happens, the doctor will never break down, irrespective of how bad the situation is. Why? Because he must maintain his composure. Without maintaining his composure, he will not be able to render the necessary help. Next, we say what? Use your common sense. Rules may be broken depending on the prevailing situation, especially when the first aider and the victim may be exposed to further danger, such as in the case of what? Fire incident. Now, remember we said you don't move the victim. Here's an example of this. If the victim is, you are rescuing the victim from a burning building, right, and the victim is unconscious, you can't say, oh, the rule says I cannot move the victim, so I must render help to the victim while I'm in the burning building. No, 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 no. You cannot do this, right? So as much as possible, use your common sense. Where you need to break the rules, you may need to break the rules. For example, if the clothing of the victim is on fire, you may need to remove the clothing. Even though we said losing, we didn't say you should remove. But you need to remove the clothing, right? So use common sense. Then do not attempt to do too much if you are unsure of what to do. If you don't know what to do, you get to a situation and you are totally unfamiliar with this situation, you don't know what help to render. It is better not to do anything. than to make matters what worse. Because if anything happens to the victim, the family of the victim can sue you as the cause of whatever happened. So if you are not sure of what to do, it's better not to do too much, right? Now let's go to the next responsibilities of a first aider. So when you arrive at the first aid scene, the first thing I do is what you assess the situation. We're still going to integrate this under other topics. So first thing, assess the situation, right? What caused the victim to be there? Is there further danger in that environment? Can that danger affect you as a first aider? Can it even make you the next victim, right? Assess the situation. And remember what we said about qualities of a good first aider. Observant, you must be very observant. Next, identify the disease and conditions from which the casualty is suffering. And this is what we call a diagnosis. So identify what caused the victim to be there. What is the victim suffering from? And of course, you must note that you may have multiple victims. You may have multiple victims. And of course, you have to attempt to be one with a more life-threatening condition. A good example that we usually use is the 3 B's of first aid. That's breathing, bleeding, and broken bones. Breathing, bleeding, and broken bones. If you have victims, right, that are having breathing issues, you have victims that are bleeding, and you have victims that are having broken bones, you must be able to quickly observe that so that you can save life first before attending to other cases. So we said that what? Identify the condition or the disease from which the victim is suffering, then give immediate, appropriate, adequate treatment, bearing in mind that a casualty may have more than one injury, and some casualties. Are we together? Are we together? All right. We said give immediate, appropriate, adequate attention treatment, bearing in mind that a casualty may have more than one injury and that some casualties will require more urgent attention than others. So when registering first aid, you must also take note of all these things. Then we said that arrange without further delay for the disposal of the victim or the casualty to a hospital, a doctor, or a home according to the seriousness of the condition. Now let's talk about principles. Let's talk about principles and practices of emergency management. Principles and practices of emergency management. So the first thing you do when you get to the scene is that what? You survey the scene. We mentioned this before. And what are you surveying the scene for? You are looking out for danger, right? What is in that environment that caused the victim to be in the position? Can that thing affect you also? Is it a moving vehicle, right? Is it an animal that attacked the victim? You have to survey the scene. It's not just the victim's safety you have to worry about. You have to also have to worry about your own safety. So survey the scene, then conduct or do a primary survey of the victim. When we say primary survey, you're looking out for life-threatening conditions, bleeding conditions, breathing conditions, life-threatening conditions, right? Then attend to those issues. Then when you do a primary survey, you call medical attention. Now, before you start rendering help to the victim, you call medical attention. We'll still get to this, we'll talk about this later. Then you carry out a secondary survey, and we are saying secondary survey, you look out for non-life threatening conditions, other injuries the victim may have suffered while in that situation. Now let's talk about the ABCs of first aid. So ABCs of first aid, we have ABC. The first says airway, second says breathing, and the third says what? Circulation. So for airway, opening the airway. Now, whenever you have an accident scene, right, a couple of things can be a challenge for a victim. Now, if breathing, You check the victim and you find out that the victim is not breathing. It can be a couple of factors. One of them can just be that the victim's airway is blocked. Now, when people lie down and they lose consciousness, sometimes their tongue, the back of their tongue falls backwards and blocks the airway. If you notice when you watch a lot of veterinary cases, veterinary documentaries, you see that whenever they want to carry out operation on an animal, they put the animal on they make the animal fall asleep, right? Then they pull out the tongue. Now, why do they pull out the tongue? Because they don't want the tongue to fall backwards and block the airway, preventing that animal from breathing. It's the same thing with human beings too. So whenever people lose consciousness, the tongue can fall backward, especially if the person's on his back, right, and block the airway, right? So the first thing you look out, check is what is the airway of the victim, followed by breathing, and followed by circulation. But we'll still talk about this when we're discussing CPR. Now, making a call. How do you make a call? You say you make the call to medical units yourself or give the responsibility to a bystander. Now, if you are the only first aider in the scene and there is no doctor, there's nobody can render help, it is better you delegate this duty to a bystander, right, and guide him on what to do while rendering help to the victim because time is counting. Then we say you make sure the adequate and precise information is passed on to the medical units coming around. So we said the information should include number one, the location of the emergency, the exact address, city, location, landmark, name of the building. Now, if it is possible, as much as possible, give the exact location because the life is at stake here. The ambulance cannot be moving other skelter searching for where the victim actually is. So you have to give the exact location. In a position where there is no addressing system in the place, you can use a landmark, right? If there is a mosque, there's a church around the place, you can mention the name of the church, name of the mosque. If there's a huge building, if there's a major landmark in that area, make reference to that landmark. Number two, we say you give the telephone number being used. Now, is telephone number yours? Just in case they want to call you back and get more information, right? So you state that. You state the name of the caller, that's you, right? If you're the one rendering the facility, you also state it. You also state what happened to an extent, right? There was an accident, there was an animal attack, so that they have understanding before coming. If it was a snake bite, they can also prepare and bring what antivenom with them, right? Then you also state the number of victims. When you have multiple victims, you state the number of victims. Then lastly, you state the help being given. Is there a doctor on the scene, right? Is there a first aider on the scene? Who is on the scene rendering help? All these things you state, and you do not drop the call. You wait for them, they may have questions for you, right? Before finally then ending the call. Then you keep the phone close to you in case they will call back, in case medical attention calls you back. Right, now let's go to the next thing, survey the scene. So in survey the scene, what do? In responding to an emergency situation, make a quick survey of the entire scene. So we say number one, do not only look at the victim, look at the area around the victim because what caused the victim to be in that position may just be around the area. This should take only a few seconds and decide what to do next. Then consider the following as you do your survey. Number one, is the scene safe? What happened? If the victim is conscious, you check that too. Are there bystanders who can help? How many people are injured? How many people are involved in the accident? Then we say do a primary survey. Now I mentioned this before. We say the purpose of a primary survey is to check the life-threatening conditions and to give urgent first aid care, right? Check for life-threatening conditions and to give urgent first aid care. So now let's look at what we check for in the primary survey. So in the primary survey, what you check for, there's an abbreviation for it. It's called Dr. ABC, right? Dr. ABC. Now, before doing this, of course, as you arrive this, okay, I'll explain it as I move forward. So what does D represent? D represents danger. We said what? Survey the scene. What you're surveying the scene for is what? Danger. Just remember Dr. ABC. D, danger. You're looking for what? Danger. Then next is R. R represents response, right? So you solicit response from the victim. Is the victim conscious? Is the victim not conscious? You call the name of the victim. If you know the name, sir, are you okay? Ma'am, are you okay? Right? You can tap the victim on the shoulder. You can pinch the victim on the shoulder just to solicit what? Response. If there is no response, then you can check the airway, right? To see if there's any obstruction. If the victim was chewing something before the accident happened, right? That thing could block the airway of the victim. You can just scoop that out also. Then tilt the head backwards. We'll see a diagram illustrating this. So you check the airway, you check for breathing. Now, when checking for breathing, we use an abbreviation that we call look, listen, or feel. Look, listen, or feel. What look, listen, feel represents is You put the victim on their back, right? You place your cheek and your ear close to the nose and the mouth, nostrils and the mouth of the victim. Then you look across down the abdominal region of the victim. If the victim is breathing, you will see a slight rise and fall. You'll see a slight rise and fall along the abdominal region, just as we are seeing here. You see a slight rise and fall along the abdominal region. If the victim is breathing, you could also hear a soft breath of the victim in your ears, and you will feel a soft sensation of the breathing on your cheeks. Now, you look at for breathing. Then, if the victim is breathing or the victim is not breathing, you can also look for what? Circulation. And you can check looking at the pulse of the victim. You can use the jugular vein of the victim is on either side of the neck, right? You can just put your hands on the neck and check to see if there is circulation, if the victim is breathing. Now, let's look at some of the illustrations that we have here. So we see danger. As you can see in this picture here, you can see a situation where there's a vehicular accident, right? You may be able to attend to a victim here, and you may not, because this is a road. Vehicles are still moving, so you may need to what? Pull the victim off or block off the road so that you can attend to the victim if you can. Then number two, we say what? You solicit response. The victim conscious or unconscious. You shout, you shake, no response, give a painful stimuli. You can what? Pinch the victim. Then we go to the next thing, you check what? Airway. So if you look at this diagram, you see what we say here. You tilt the jaw chin of the victim forward, pushing the head backwards. This straightens the tongue. The first diagram we see here, we see where the tongue has blocked the airway. The next one, you see that the airway has been cleared. By doing this, you push out the chin, then you push in the from the forehead, tilting the head of the victim backwards. Then you look, you listen, you feel. Observe for breathing. Watch and feel the chest rise and fall. Checking breathing for what? 5 seconds, no more than 5 seconds. We see it illustrated here. Then if the patient is breathing, leave the patient on the side with the jaw supported. Now, if the victim is breathing and you're only checking for, you're only performing CPR, then you put the victim what we call the recovery position. We'll see an example of that as we move forward. Then, if the victim is not breathing, right? If the patient is not breathing, turn on their back and breathe in for the victim. Give 2 initial breaths, what we call the kiss of life. Now, if you check the victim and notice that there is no breath, then you can proceed and give the victim 2 rescue breaths. And the way you do this is that you pinch or you seal the nostrils of the victim to ensure that whatever you are breathing does not escape through the nostrils, right? You take in a fresh breath, then you breathe into the victim, sealing your lips around the victim's lips and breathing into the victim. Then you look, you listen, you feel. Take in another breath, then breathe into the victim again. So you give 2 breaths to the victim. If the victim, then you listen, you look, you feel. Now, this has the potential of what? Restarting the victim's breathing. If the victim starts breathing, you listen, you feel, and you look to check if the breathing would normalize. Then you continue giving the rescue breath until the breathing of the victim normalizes, right? Now, if you give the rescue breath and the victim does not start breathing, then you may need to proceed with external chest compressions. So we also talked about circulation. To check for circulation, of course, you check the pulse, right, on the jugular vein, right, both sides of the neck, like this man is doing here, right. Now we now come to external chest compression, which is what we call CPR. So if the pulse is absent, commence with what? CPR. So just to run down everything again, confirm that no ginger, no response, airway is clear and open, right? No breathing and no pulse. Technique: 30 chest compressions per minute and 2 rescue breaths. 30 chest compressions per minute and 2 rescue breaths. So how do you perform external chest compression? Of course, you lie the victim on the back, right? You kneel alongside the victim. Then you place the heel of one of your hands on the crest of the chest. When you look at the chest of the victim, visualize where the middle of the chest is. You place the heel of your hand. If you look at your chest, there is a middle, right, in between your 2 breasts. There's a middle of it. In the center side of it, you place the heel of your hand on that part, you interlock with the other hand, right? And you ensure that your hands are straight. Then you perform 30 chest compressions, 30 chest compressions, leaning across alongside the victim. When you perform 30 chest compressions at the rate of what? 100 per minute, you give the victim 2 rescue breaths. You look, you listen, you feel. 30 chest compression again, 2 breaths. Look, listen, feel, to check if breathing has started. If it has not started, you continue until medical attention arrives. And this is why one of the first things you must do is that what? You must first of all call for medical help, so that as you are doing this, they are on their way. Now, there are 2 reasons why you do this. You do this, number 1, to either keep that victim alive. If the victim does not regain consciousness and the breathing does not start, you will need to breathe for the victim. Now, a victim is not dead until the victim is brain dead. It takes like 4 to 6 minutes for the brain to die if it does not receive breath. So when you are breathing in for the victim, you are providing the breath or the air necessary to supply the brain the oxygen needed to keep the body functional and to not go into a coma, to not become comatose, right? So by breathing in for the victim, you are performing the work of the lungs. And by giving the chest compressions, you are performing the work of the heart in pumping blood to the brain, that's oxygenated blood to the brain. Number 2 thing that you are doing is that you are trying to jumpstart the heart. In performing 30 chest compressions, you can kickstart the circulation process of the heart, and the person can resume breathing again, right? So if the person resumes breathing, you stop the chest compressions, then you breathe in for the victim until the breathing normalizes, right? When you breathing normalizes, you can now place the victim in the recovery position. You place the victim in the recovery position and monitor the victim's situation regularly. Then maybe attend to other victims or look out for non-life-threatening conditions, injuries that the victim may have sustained while the victim was in that position. So as we said here, do a secondary survey after checking and administering to the primary survey and the life-threatening conditions. You do a secondary survey. So the purpose of this is to check the victim carefully from head to toe in an orderly manner for injuries or other problems that are not of immediate threat to life, but can cause problems if not corrected. For example, broken bones, right? Broken bones. Then, of course, you must have made arrangement for the victim to be taken to the hospital, taken home, for a doctor to come to the victim, right? So we said deciding to transport the victim. After completing emergency action principles, you might consider transporting the victim to the hospital. Now, if you get word that the ambulance may not be able to come, you must make arrangements for the victim to be taken to the hospital. It's also part of your work as a first aider. Remember the scope of first aid, right? The scope of first aid, we said number 1, diagnosis, number 2, treatment, and number 3, evacuation. So it is part of our job to also what? Evacuate and make arrangements for the victim to be taken to the hospital. Now, if you are dealing with an infant, if you are dealing with a child, let me not say an infant, if you are dealing with a child, you don't use the heel of your hand and put the other hand across. No. You may end up breaking the victim's bones. You use one hand for a child, right? One hand in administering chest compression for a child. Well, with an infant, a baby, you use what? 2 fingers. You don't use the heel of the hand in administering first aid. In administering CPR to an infant. So it says checking breathing. In order to find out whether a casualty is breathing, place ear above the casualty's mouth, right? Look along the chest of the abdomen, right? Open the airway, and all that is explained there. Now, breathing for the casualty, mouth to mouth. We say here that remove any obvious obstruction over the face or constriction around the neck, that is remove anything that may block circulation. Open the airway, remove any debris from the mouth or the throat. Open the mouth of the victim, take a deep breath, pinch the nostrils together with your fingers and seal your lips around the mouth for a mouth to nose, close to the casualty's mouth with your thumb and seal the lips. So you can do a mouth to nose or a mouth to mouth. Either is appropriate. Now look across along the chest, blow into the casualty's lungs until you see the chest rise to maximum expansion. Then lastly, CPR. I've already explained the how you carry out CPR. Now let's go just talk about external chest compression. So we said here that lay the casualty on the back on a firm surface, kneel alongside the casualty facing the chest, and In line with the heart, locate the lower section of the rib margin of the bottom. Place your thumb midway between the two landmarks to find the center. Place the heel of one hand on the center of the lower half of the breastbone. Keep your finger off the ribs, right? So keep your finger off the ribs. Hover this hand and lock your fingers together like we see in this example. Like we see in this example here, where the fingers, the hands are what? They are interlocked. So you can interlock your fingers while administering CPR. Now, looking along the chest, blow into, okay, this is not to mouth. So the next point is here is keep your arms straight, right, and rock forward. So don't bend your arms as you are administering external chest compression. Keep your arms straight. Press down on the lower half of the breast. All right, so this is where we're going to stop for today's class. We have come to the end. Please send your questions. You can forward your questions to the mail. Thank you very much. God bless you for listening. Have a wonderful day.